What if I told you that the Great Depression didn't actually make people more miserable? What if the darkest economic period in modern history accidentally created something we've been chasing ever since, and lost along the way? We spend so much time talking about what the Depression took away: jobs, money, security, the illusion that hard work guaranteed prosperity. The government certainly wants us to remember the poverty, the breadlines, the hopelessness. It makes the New Deal sound like salvation. But here's what nobody really discusses: the data on happiness, family cohesion, community trust, and psychological resilience during this period tells a story that contradicts almost everything we believe about what we actually need to feel fulfilled. The uncomfortable truth is this: Depression-era Americans reported higher levels of life satisfaction than we do now. Not because they enjoyed poverty, they didn't, but because they'd accidentally stumbled into something our modern economy has systematically dismantled. They had something we've traded away for convenience, and we don't even realize it's gone. Let me explain what I mean. In 2024, we have more connections than ever before. We're networked, friended, followed, and liked. We have more entertainment options than kings once had. We can have almost anything delivered to our door. And yet, loneliness has become an epidemic. Depression and anxiety are at all-time highs. We're medicated, isolated, and paradoxically more anxious about money than people were during an actual economic catastrophe. So what was different about the 1930s? What was the secret ingredient that made people feel more okay despite having objectively less? The answer lives in something so simple, so obvious, that we've completely inverted it in modern life: proximity, purpose, interdependence, necessity. During the Depression, your survival didn't depend on impressing people on the internet. It depended on your neighbor, your family, your community. When you couldn't buy your way out of problems, you had to solve them together. This created bonds that were forged in actual shared struggle, not in the hollow glow of a screen. The Depression created what psychologists now call enforced togetherness. Families lived in smaller spaces. Multiple generations shared roofs. You didn't have the luxury of retreating to your room with your private entertainment device. You ate dinner together because you had to. You talked because there was nothing else to do. You helped because you'd starve if you didn't. What sounds like a deprivation to us, it was actually the foundation of human happiness. Now here's where this gets dark. The government, economists, and corporate interests absolutely understand this. They know that human happiness is resilient to poverty, but fragile in isolation. They know that community is an antidote to despair. And they know that if people realize they didn't need much to be happy, the entire consumer economy collapses. So instead of telling you the truth about what made Depression-era people more resilient, we get this narrative: the Depression was pure suffering, and the solution is endless growth, endless consumption, endless competition. Be grateful you have options. Be grateful you can live alone. Be grateful you can work from home. Be grateful you have streaming services. What we're not told is that each of these freedoms is actually a carefully engineered isolation device. The economy needs you to be isolated, because an isolated person is a consuming person. An isolated person doesn't barter or share. An isolated person can't access the social capital that once made money less necessary. An isolated person has to buy everything: childcare, entertainment, community, meaning, even friendship, through dating apps and social networks that monetize connection itself. The Depression forced people to be interdependent. Modern capitalism is forcing us to be radically independent, and that's the real secret. But here's the thing that saves this from being just another doomsaying video. Understanding this secret is actually liberating, because once you see it, you can make different choices. You don't have to wait for another economic collapse to rebuild the things that actually matter. Some Depression-era people, particularly in immigrant communities and rural areas, maintain these bonds longer than others. And when you look at where the happiest, most resilient communities are today, they're not in the wealthiest suburbs. They're in tight-knit neighborhoods where people still know their neighbors. They're in cultures that never fully embrace the isolation model. They're in places where necessity still creates interdependence. You can replicate these conditions voluntarily. You can choose proximity over isolation. You can choose to need people instead of products. You can choose to spend time in activities that require mutual dependence, instead of solo consumption. This is what the Depression-era secrets really point to. Not how to survive hardship, though those lessons matter, but how to build a life that doesn't require hardship to feel meaningful. How to engineer necessity through choice rather than having it imposed by circumstance. The Depression made people happier not because they wanted less, they would have chosen more if they could, but because they were forced into the very conditions that human psychology is evolved to thrive in. We're social creatures. We evolved in groups. We're designed to need each other. And for about 70 years, we've been trying to engineer ourselves out of that fundamental truth. The government doesn't want you remembering this, because the moment you realize that you don't need much to be happy, the moment you realize that the source of your unhappiness might be the very consumption that's supposed to cure it, the entire system becomes vulnerable. An economy built on endless growth requires endless dissatisfaction. It requires you to feel like something is missing. It requires isolation, because isolated people are consuming people. It requires you to look at your neighbor's life, curated on Instagram, of course, and feel like you're falling behind. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's just economics. The system works exactly as designed. It just works against your actual happiness, not for it. And the beautiful part? You get to decide whether you're going to keep playing. You don't have to wait for a depression or a collapse. You can start right now, in small ways, rebuilding the very thing that made our grandparents more resilient: belonging. The Depression-era secret the government doesn't want you remembering isn't about rationing or victory gardens or how to survive on nothing. It's that you might be happier with less, but only if less includes more of the people you love. The moment you understand that, you're unstoppable. Which brings me to something that might help you understand all of this even deeper. There's a resource I've put together in the description and in the pinned comment that breaks down exactly how this psychological pattern developed and where we can see it playing out in modern society right now. If you're curious about the actual research behind all of this, definitely check that out. Because the second part of understanding this secret is realizing what it means for you, specifically. How you can start rebuilding these connections without waiting for external circumstances to force your hand. The thing about connection is that it doesn't require permission. It doesn't require a crisis. It doesn't even require anyone else to understand why you're doing it. You can start today, right now, if you wanted to. But here's where most people get stuck. They understand the concept intellectually. They nod along, they feel the emotional resonance, and then they go back to their phone. Back to the algorithm that's specifically designed to keep them isolated. Because isolated people are predictable people. They're easier to sell to, easier to influence, easier to control. The Depression era had something we've largely lost. Not because it disappeared, but because we actively chose convenience over it. And I'm not blaming you for that choice. The convenience is real. The efficiency is real. Ordering groceries to your door instead of going to the market, streaming content instead of gathering for a community event, messaging someone instead of walking to their house. These are objectively easier. But easier isn't always better, and I think somewhere deep down, you already know that. What the Depression taught people, not as philosophy, but as raw survival necessity, was that your neighbor's survival was intertwined with yours. If your neighbor's crop failed, that mattered to you. If their child got sick, you had to help because there was no hospital. If they didn't have food and you shared what you had, you were actually securing your own future through reciprocity. This wasn't charity. This was mathematics. We've forgotten that mathematics because we've outsourced it. We've turned it into a system where governments, corporations, and institutions handle the interdependence for us. And in doing so, we've become oddly dependent on these systems while simultaneously feeling entirely alone. Here's something that might disturb you a little bit. In the 1930s, suicide rates actually dropped during the deepest part of the Depression. Not because things got better, they got worse. Economically, things were catastrophic, but suicide rates went down. Do you know why? Because people weren't alone. And loneliness, it turns out, is more dangerous to your mental health than poverty. More dangerous than uncertainty. More dangerous than loss itself. It's the loss combined with isolation that breaks people. We've somehow managed to create a world where we have unprecedented material comfort, and yet loneliness is at an all-time high. We have more ways to connect than ever before, and yet we're more disconnected. That's not an accident. That's a design feature. The Depression generation didn't have the option of performative connection. You couldn't post about your struggle and hope for likes. You had to actually show up. You had to actually be present. And that presence, that genuine human engagement, became the foundation of resilience. Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm not saying we should go back to the 1930s. That's not practical or even desirable. But I am saying that we've swung so far in the opposite direction that we've lost something essential in the process. And the people who understand this, the ones who are actually building resilience in their lives right now, they're doing something that looks almost countercultural in our current moment. They're choosing inconvenience. They're choosing the harder path. They're walking to someone's house instead of texting. They're attending community meetings even though they could watch the summary online. They're eating dinner at a table with people instead of in front of a screen. They're asking their neighbors for things instead of ordering them from a corporation. And here's the part that might surprise you. They're happier. Not in the Instagram sense, not in the curated, optimized, content-ready sense, but in the fundamental, existential, I actually want to be alive sense. The secret that the Depression era understood was that your mental and emotional health is literally built on the quality of your relationships, not the quantity, the quality. One genuine connection is worth more than 1,000 parasocial relationships with content creators and algorithms. Now, some of you are probably thinking, okay, this sounds nice in theory, but I have responsibilities. I have work. I have obligations. I don't have time to rebuild my entire social structure. And you're right, you don't have time to do it all at once. But you have time to do one thing. One thing. That's the unit of change. Not transformation. Not complete life overhaul. One thing that you do differently. Maybe it's joining a club. Maybe it's attending a local meeting about something you care about. Maybe it's starting a conversation with someone at the coffee shop. Maybe it's inviting a neighbor over for coffee. Maybe it's volunteering for something that actually matters to you. Maybe it's just eating one meal a week with someone else, without phones, without distractions. The Depression generation didn't wake up one day and decide to build community. They had to. Circumstances forced them, but in being forced, they discovered something essential about human nature, that we need it. We need each other, and when that need is acknowledged and acted upon, it changes everything. You know what one of the most prescribed medications is right now? Antidepressants. And they help, absolutely. But do you know what else helps? Belonging, connection, being needed, being known. These things are not metaphorical. They're neurological. They're biological. They're as real as any medication, except they're free, and they actually address the root cause, rather than just the symptom. The government doesn't want you remembering this because isolated people are easier to manage. Corporations don't want you remembering this because isolated people buy more stuff, looking for external solutions to internal problems of disconnection. But you're watching this, which means part of you already remembers. Part of you already knows that something is missing. That knowledge is your advantage. So what do we do with this knowledge? How do we take what we've uncovered about the Depression era and actually apply it to our lives right now? The first thing is simple but profound. You have to choose connection deliberately, not the digital kind, not the kind where you're performing for an algorithm. Real, messy, inconvenient, time-consuming connection with actual human beings. Maybe that's a weekly dinner with people you love. Maybe it's joining a club or a group that meets in person. Maybe it's volunteering somewhere that matters to you. The form doesn't matter as much as the intentionality. You're saying no to the path of least resistance and yes to friction, to vulnerability, to being truly seen. The second thing is to understand that your own well-being is political. When you choose to build genuine community, when you refuse to be isolated, when you invest in people who aren't useful to you in any economic sense, you're making a choice that goes against what the current system wants. You're not rebelling in a violent way. You're rebelling by being human in the fullest sense, by nurturing the things that actually heal you instead of the things that only distract you. The third thing is to become a keeper of this memory. Tell people about what you've learned, not in a preachy way, just in the normal flow of conversation. When someone mentions they're struggling, you mention the importance of real connection. When someone talks about feeling empty despite having everything, you mention belonging. You become a gentle reminder that there's a different way to think about this whole thing. You become part of a quiet revolution of people who understand that the Depression era wasn't just about economic collapse. It was about what humans can endure and even thrive through when they have each other. There's a deeper resource I've put together that goes into the psychological mechanisms behind all this, the neuroscience of belonging, and practical frameworks for building community in a world that actively works against it. You'll find that in the description and pinned comment if you want to dive even deeper. But here's what I want you to understand most fundamentally. The government doesn't want you remembering the Depression era because it's proof. It's proof that humans are resilient, that we can handle hardship, that community is more powerful than consumption, that meaning doesn't come from money or status or comfort, that we're capable of extraordinary kindness and cooperation and generosity even, or maybe especially, when resources are scarce. And that's dangerous information to those who benefit from you feeling powerless and isolated. The Depression didn't end because the government figured out some economic trick. It ended because people built things, because they created, because they invested in each other, because they decided to be human together. And that same power is inside you right now. You might not have lived through the Depression, but you carry the inheritance of those who did. You carry the knowledge that humans can survive, that we can adapt, that we can thrive without the things we've been told are essential. The question isn't whether you remember the Depression era. Most of us don't have direct memories of it. The question is whether you'll remember what it teaches us, whether you'll remember that disconnection is a choice, not a destiny, whether you'll remember that community is radical, whether you'll remember that you're capable of far more than you've been told. That's what they don't want you remembering. Not the specific facts of the Depression era. The fact that you have more power than you think, that your choices matter, that connection matters, that you matter. If you're ready to actually explore this further and find practical ways to build community and reclaim your well-being, everything I've mentioned is waiting for you in the description and in the pinned comment. This isn't just theory, it's actionable. Thanks so much for watching. Your time is precious, and the fact that you spent it thinking through these ideas with me means a lot. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss what we're exploring next. And please, activate the notification bell so you're in